Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the All in Crypto podcast. I am your host, Rupert, and today I am extremely excited about introducing our next guest. We have the CEO, CIO of US Global Investors, and of course, the chairman of Hive Digital. Welcome on board, Frank. How are you?
Outstanding, my friend, and it's great to be with you.
The pleasure is truly all mine. And Frank, with all my guests, I really like to go back to the start. You mentioned that you graduated in 1978 into the kind of world of investing, and you were really a specialist, having read Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, towards gold. Perhaps you could tell us about your kind of journey in investing and how you ended up where you are today.
I think what's really important for young people is to really be grateful and respect their journey. And they just don't realize often, and I didn't realize back then, that the stepping stones you take are so enriching. And you can only, as Steve Jobs says, is look back to connect the dots. And that's really important as you project yourself forward, that you make better decisions by continuously being thoughtful and grateful as you look back at a big error. Well, that was a learning experience. You always rebound. That sort of mindset, the growth mindset that was well documented by a professor from Stanford on the difference between, say, American entrepreneurs and other places is they promote this growth mindset. So, at any rate, I'm a kid from Toronto. My mother was a nurse that went into education and politics for education, in particular in the inner city areas. My guardian father is an Anglican priest. So, and he was a musician and he spoke several languages. I'm not as close as smart as he was or my mother, but I did learn a lot that you don't realize at this age now that I am. I look at these, we were talking earlier about the intersection of politics, social, technology, finance, and there's these new emergence. And when I use this word emergent, it comes out of Santa Fe's think tank where the atomic bomb and the famous movie Oppenheimer was highlights where it was created. And they call it the complex adaptive system, CAS. And by looking at a lens of complex adaptive system, you can see the emergence of new things. And it could be a virus. It could be social media. It could be a new pope, as we were talking about. And I just love that to stimulate my curiosity. Could it be? Would it be? What's the probability? So in that journey of coming up being really socially concerned, I was the kid that went into finance as I segued from medicine. And so I studied the sciences, and I when I said I'm not going to go and go through medical school, my mother was devastated. But I went into finance, and you know what? The laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, the rules of biology, they've really helped me to be a good investor, a thoughtful investor, and that upbringing. So you don't realize what you're doing at the time, but I share with all of you, it's enriching. And it's so important. So now I go from being on what they call the buy side as a research analyst, a quant type of model. And I read Napoleon's book, Think and Grow Rich, and Warren Buffett recommended it. And one of the chapters was you have to become something that you really are good at, that you really know. You become the industry expert in that field. So coming from Canada originally, I said, it's gold. And I've got to learn more about the monetary dynamics of gold, at the same time, gold financing and gold mining. And so on that journey, I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I took the first gold royalty company public called Franco-Nevada, which has the highest revenue as a public company, something like $35 million of revenue per employee. NVIDIA is $3.5 million. Apple's $2.5 million. So put that in context. I was part of that journey with two great Canadian entrepreneurs. And they've now become some of Canada's biggest philanthropists. And that taught me. So I have given a lot of money back for education, for scholarships in Canada. And now I've been doing this in Texas. So with that, that's my sort of journey. I spent 13 years and I went from being an analyst to investment banking, built a trading desk. And then I said, you know what? I only like snow to ski in. I don't like living in every day. And taxes went crazy in Canada at the time. So I basically moved to Texas and started building this company called US Global Investors. And I'm going to come back to Canada. My high school was 30% Chinese in 1970. I'm downtown
Wow.
Toronto. You don't realize that had a big impact on me because I was very quick to embrace China and the changes with China because I grew up learning how to say ni hao. And my best friends were Ukrainian and Polish. And if I went to their homes and I said, Dobry den to the Ukrainian mother, she says, oh, you're too skinny, more cookies, more food. And then I had to and say, Dzień dobry to the Polish moms. And they loved me and they gave me as a little 12-year-old boy more food. Who likes cookies when you're a kid? So it was interesting that you realized that I launched the first Eastern European fund, and it was the idea of the currency creating the EU was a Canadian economist that created that. And I said, well, I grew up with Eastern European people. They're so educated, such family values, etc. I want to create the first Eastern European fund, and I did. And it went from 0 to 12 million to 4 million, then to 1.2 billion dollars. And but I'm trying to explain, really important for your listeners. Each step you don't realize until you look back how powerful it was for you making good decisions. I launched the first China Region Opportunity Fund, and I was trying to launch a Bitcoin ETF after I launched the JETS ETF. And the JETS ETF is the premier go-to on Reddit and anywhere else on New York Stock Exchange, now listed in Mexico City, Bogota, and Lima, Peru. And so my quant disciplines allowed me to create the first Smart Beta 2.0 thematic airline. So here you could buy this little product as 9% of the world's GDP. It's incredible that you could create such a powerful. If you think the orange pill is so powerful, what it is, I was able to create that using quant math for a thematic ETF. And so with that, after I launched that in 2015, I tried to launch a Bitcoin ETF and realized it wasn't going to happen. And it didn't happen till a year ago. And I realized it was because it was AML and KYC concerns. But if you're a Bitcoin miner and you create the original coin, well, you don't have that problem. I just bank it. I mine, I bank. If I have to sell something to pay the electrical bill, I do that. And so I went out to co-found the first basically crypto mining company to go public, and it was crazy. You immediately saw Novogratz came to Canada to raise his money. Investment banker left the firm that took us public to create Hut 8. So you see that there's this catalyst being done, and Canada was unique because they're used to exploration for gold mining companies. So how did I learn about Bitcoin? I learned because of my world in gold. And I know that they're both decentralized. The difference, one is easier, more portable, but the psychology of human beings is that there's a lot of 60% of the world wants to have some tangible wealth. That's how they function. And so we can see that gold has continued to rise this century. And a big part of that is rising GDP per capita of China and India. And now China's the second biggest GDP of the world, and their government's buying gold, but consumers are buying gold. And the more wealth their GDP rises, the more gold they buy. It's just culture. And it's not, I believe, going to go away. And the same thing happens with the Middle East. So now we come along with the evolution, which I discovered in my gold trance around the world. In Africa, before Bitcoin comes out, in Kenya was the digital M-Pesa. And it was done by a British engineer for the telecom industry, because it's really who moves money, or not banks, is the telecom industry moves the money. And they wanted to be able to bank the unbankable. and it was becoming a raving success. The telecom companies today in East Africa, it's more than 60% of all transactions are done by people that don't have a high school education, all off their phones. So the idea and the concept of digital wealth was sort of at the back of my mind. Learning now about Bitcoin, I said, I'm so late. 2017. I should have known this earlier. And I get frustrated with myself, but I said, no, I have to do something, and that was the creation. So I put up the first 5 million. Immediately, 30 million came behind it. I said I'd be the chairman of this entity, and we started in Iceland, and we were mining Ethereum. Then we went to Sweden, and we were 6% of the global network. It was an incredible success. And then I learned on that journey that, and speaking at conferences, and that there's all these kids that were gamers went to become coders, and they end up creating exchanges that a 12-year-old kid could get a bank account. It's like impassive banking the unbankable. A 12-year-old, 14-year-old can't get a bank account, but all of a sudden an exchange has been created out of nowhere by coders, and they can convert their Ethereum into cash to buy a new computer with new GPU chips. And so I really became excited about this learning this journey, and that's where we are.
And what, you mentioned the sort of orange pill, if you will. What was the moment for you? You mentioned that certainly in Africa, what was going on, and you tried to launch a Bitcoin ETF, and then, of course, very rightly gone into mining and all your past experiences. And there's really something to be taken from all of that. Trust in the process, trust in the journey, because it might not feel like what you're doing, perhaps, or it may feel like what you're doing is valuable or not valuable at the time. But later on down the line, it's always amazing how life works, isn't it?
It,
That
it,
these
it,
things come back around.
it is, and I was so impressed with the banking of the unbankables when I was there, but I just sort of stuck that in the back of my brain cells, and that door didn't open until I went in 2017. I went to Consensus in New York City, and I was really captivated by the CEO of Fidelity, and she's one of the wealthiest women in the world. She's a technologist. She never speaks at investment conferences, but she's at Consensus talking about Bitcoin mining and the significance of the blockchain, and how important it is for so many reasons. And her vision was that it would take over all transactions, and it would stop failed delivery, it would stop illegal shorting. It would be the best thing for how big they are at Fidelity. And she had been a Bitcoin miner using data centers in Quebec. So I was said, wow, something big is happening. And in my world of private equity, mutual funds, and ETFs, I really didn't grasp how big it is. That there's like 6,000 people there spending $1,000 a ticket. Something big. You just wouldn't get that at an ETF mutual fund conference. There would be retail people. It's expected to be free. They don't pay. People are willing to pay. And then I went to London, and it was, you got to learn about this new type of tethering that's taking place with shredding, how you shred coins and break them up. And I said, really, it's in the city. It's 8 o'clock at night, and it's, as you know, in London it'll be misty and wet, and you go downstairs in the old city, and there's like 100 people all in suits taking notes from someone speaking. There's no one doing this on gold. There's no one. It was just that revelation that something big is happening outside of my world, and I said I must embrace it as fast as I can, and that was my orange pill, and I realized by September 2017 we went public, and we immediately hit the door running with about 36 million in revenue and 3 employees. So that's like $10
Wow.
million an employee. Like, that's just huge to start a business. And that was the ignition of the journey.
I think one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin, the crypto space more broadly, is that normal people have now taken a major interest in finance. normal people are now getting involved in the investment arena. It's kind of been that introduction into what is such a fundamental part of the world as it is today. And I want to talk about Bitcoin's role in all of that. How do you broadly view Bitcoin? Do you view it as an instrument for investing, an instrument for storing your wealth? Do you view it as something that's going to be used monetarily as a money? What's your big overview on Bitcoin? What would you say Bitcoin is? It can be multiple things. I'd love your take on that.
I think there's going to be so many ideas that come from it. And in my research, what I found was in 91, Bell Labs had two professors that actually created the basic blockchain. And it was for telecom. But nothing was done with it. It was dormant. And then along comes Adam Beck, and he comes out with, he's so fed up with spammers, and he comes out with an algorithm, as he's also a cryptologist, to stop the spamming. And so the technology starts to grow. And then Napster comes out as the guy of the year, and it demonstrates the significance of peer-to-peer. The real icing on the cake that creates this evolution, I think, of Bitcoin was SHA 256 that the DARPA had funded for the Defense Department of America, an encryption that be next to impossible to break. And there was no backdoor into the original SHA 256. And that was the coding. So I became really thrilled about learning how the technology wasn't all done one day, but when it emerged, it was so powerful, it was so profound that it would be the creation of the concept that decentralized peer-to-peer Napster. The concept is now for the shield, the iron shield over America, that it's got to be decentralized. The thought leaders that are writing and drafting this. So Bitcoin is something that's an incredible phenomenon with no CEO, no board of directors. It goes to $2 trillion market cap. And it trades almost $50 billion a day. Like, this is very significant. And you always get the naysayers, why it's negative. I think what we have to just wrestle with is the banking lobbying group is really the stumbling block, because I've seen this in Canada and my experience of funding and capital raising, that fintech never really got to take off in Canada like the US, because 5 banks control 80% of all assets. So if you want to talk to their fintech analyst for funding, you have to go to New York City for the Canadian bank. Because it doesn't exist there. And I think the same thing has happened in a different way. And we also saw how the regulators in the U.S., in the U.S. and Canada, the accounting board after Enron, they created an accounting board where the auditors audit the auditors. So they have a government auditor, and it reports to the regulatory world. It was more transparent in Canada after Hive went public. All the crypto mining companies that followed, they all had to get new auditors. We couldn't have a big 7 audit firm because the accounting board told them that they weren't allowed to audit anyone in crypto. Well, who was influencing that? So that came from the Securities Commission. Well, we're in Canada. Where did that come from? Well, that came from the banks, the big banks. And where did that come from? Well, that came from the lobbying groups from the big banks. And so what we learned in 2018, 19 in Canada, it was very stealth in how it was in the US, but then it became evident to me because I went through that journey of having to get new auditors because I had funded the creation of Hive. So it was an interesting process, but I think a lot of it has to do with banks trying to control the mechanism and not saying how can they use it with guardrails. And how can they embrace it? And the premier of Bermuda, a little island out in the Atlantic, they create regulations for crypto, and Coinbase ends up setting up an office over there. And so you see that you can create guardrails, you can create regulations, but the U.S. was not because of the significance of the bank lobbying groups that were having a big influence on senators and the government. So I think that this will all of a sudden go through a reset button. And I think that that's very positive because there were a lot of rogue people that came into the industry. And you know this, and I know this with their shit coins that were out there. It was all pump and dump without a prospectus, really, disclosure. And I think that the SEC at the beginning did a great job going after some of these characters. But then it became new guard. The new guard was to overreach. And now we're swinging back to the middle, which is very important. We need regulations. I live in a regulated world. I'm a money manager. I have
Of
ETFs,
course.
so I understand all that, and I respect it. Those sort of guardrails. So I think that Bitcoin is going to change national defense because it's going to change banking because the blockchain has been validated as being great technology with the success of Bitcoin. You need winners always go to follow the winner. They always go to try to emulate who is the best athlete, who is the best team in a sport. Everyone starts studying their game film. And so now Bitcoin, everyone's going to study, like tear it apart to see, well, how can we use it? Can we apply it in some other part, such as all the drama over voting? Put it on the blockchain. We'll stop all this alleged that this political party is corrupt and that one. That's all noise. Just put it on the blockchain and we'll know. And I think that these are the positive parts that Bitcoin is a tremendous champion as we swing into the digital realm. And interesting enough, every year I spend a week at Harvard with a group of 180 CEOs, and we play kids, and we have to spend 60 hours reading cases, and then we go to class all day long until 11 o'clock at night in discussions. So in 2019, maybe 12% were digital case studies. By when I first announced that I had launched the first crypto mining company in 2018, people told me, my peers, that I was nuts. And they ridiculed me and they didn't like Elon Musk. And it was amazing to see from 80 countries, all these CEOs and some of them running billion-dollar empires. And so I said, wow. But I kept plodding along, and what you'll see today is that 50% of the cases are digital. And what they found is that the banks in Singapore in particular digitize. And then they had a CEO of a pizza company leave Bain and Company and go to Domino's Pizza, and it's the worst pizza. And he says, you've got all this data, and we're going to start data mining, and we're going to digitize everything. And they improve the quality of the pizza, improve the delivery. And during COVID, the stock goes up 500% because everything was digitized. And so I think that Bitcoin is the overall arcing umbrella, like it created Web3, that it's now going to go into national security. So with that, I launched another ETF this year called WAR, WAR. And what is it? Well, it's my journey. I learn about data centers. I learn about the importance of them. I learn the importance of AI and the application. And in that journey, I realized that President Biden really gave to the Ukraine old military equipment, because in America, quietly, they've been rebuilding all of our military to compete against the Chinese with AI. Well, what is AI? Well, it's a NVIDIA chip. Well, what does NVIDIA chip need? It needs a data center. Ah, and what was Hive an expert at? GPU chips. At one time, we had 130 specially made chips from AMD in Sweden mining Ethereum. 130,000. So when you're mining with GPU chips, it's like driving a Porsche. When you're mining with ASIC chips, it's a Bronco or a Jeep. So it's
Yep.
recognizing the difference. So when a ASIC chip is delivered to our facilities, our team unwraps them, plugs them in within 6 hours. When the H100 or 200 arrives from NVIDIA, it's 6 weeks. because you're building a brain.
Wow.
But they all need data centers. And that's the real key element. So you know what's happened in this journey? Russia invades Ukraine, energy prices around the world go up. And we slow down on our growth because we're only green and only hydro or geothermal in Iceland. And all of a sudden, everyone becomes protection of, of data centers and energy. And now it's going 180 to that it's sovereign data centers. And what you're finding is that the UK does not want their data center in France. France doesn't want it in Germany. And you're seeing that Texas doesn't want the government their data center in Louisiana. So we're seeing the idea of communities wanting to protect the value of the data. Well, what's that data worth? Just to give you a classic example, 23andMe was the breakthrough of sending in your saliva to do a DNA of your history of your family, and what part of your blood was from Slavic country or Africa or wherever. So it was all fascinating. Company was mismanaged. The data sold for $250 million.
Wow.
Okay, data is really valuable. And so that's part of my new journey of learning and building out what we learned from mining Ethereum. And the biggest mistake, and I wrote about this many times, is Ethereum going to proof of stake from proof of work was really motivated because who became one of the biggest miners before that crossover was JP Morgan. And it came out in a trial in a lawsuit that they were using AWS because they're the dominant player in staking. And it was they were all anti crypto, and then all of a sudden they were pro Ethereum. Why? Because they want to go this proof of stake, and they used all the FUD over the energy consumption that Bitcoin miners were using. So we've had to battle. We're resilient. As individuals, you have to be resilient if you're in the ecosystem. And you can see that the dome that we've created now of 21,000 decentralized nodes around the world, when China blew out everything to do with crypto, the dome went down and came right back up. And that's what, like watching Star Wars or Star Trek, when they have a force shield around them and the missiles come in and you see them come in and then boom, they explode out. And I think the concept shows the power of the decentralized network is going to be really important going forward. So when I created the war, I said, holy shoot, I need to turn around and see, back test this. And I went back 10 years, 40 quarters, 120 months. And I created the super alloy, I like to call it, where it's data centers, NVIDIA, or semiconductor chips, it's military, it's hardware. And it really has spectacular performance because it rebalances every quarter. And then you don't know, because it's in up and down cycles. Along comes Trump, and he first attacks Europe for not spending enough money on military spending, and he's going to pull out of NATO. This is all negotiating tactics. But what he did
Of
was
course.
really significant. What emerged out of there is he has a tariff war with everyone in the world. Everyone. So what did Europe do? It came out and it emerged with a huge spend on data centers and military, and is creating an industrial military complex like America has with all 50 states. So when you make an aircraft fighter, all the parts come from different parts of the states and they're assembled in Boeing or they're assembled in Norfolk, Virginia. And so every state is involved in the military industrial complex. And now Europe's going to do it. And you want to see the military stocks in Europe. You ought to see what's happened to ETFs in Europe, like the NATO ETF and the German and tank makers, etc. They have had billions of dollars, and some of them have doubled in price. So you don't know, but it all actually comes back from the significance of electrons and data centers. And what proves out over and over is Bitcoin is becoming the second and third derivative for the creation of other industries.
This stuff is remarkable because this is the trend. I think one of the best things I believe it was Scott Besson that said this, that an investor can have is the ability to imagine, an imagination. Now, you would think an imagination could be quite dangerous in regards to being an investor. However, the opposite is often true. If you can imagine a world and, like you say, link things together, like you're doing with the war ETF, like you've done with Bitcoin, you can be very much ahead of the curve. And in this digital world that we're moving towards, the need for data centers, I mean, we're nowhere near where we need to be on all of this. And I think you're very much pioneering that. In regards to the world that we currently live in, there's a hell of a lot going on. Every single day I cover the markets, I cover news related to the markets. And I think people get very worried because of all the things going on and all the uncertainty happening in the world. I would argue there's never been a better time to be interested in something like Bitcoin. Could we make the case for that? Why do you think people right now should be interested in Bitcoin? We've spoke about it from a technological point of view. How about from an investment point of view, from a kind of lifeboat-esque point of view in regards to all the uncertainty that's gripping the world right now? Why should people be paying attention to Bitcoin?
Well, last week I was in Las Vegas, and what an incredible extravaganza event! 35,000 people. I really noticed the demographics of people closer to my age showed up. There's probably 10,000 people that were over 55 years old that were roaming around with curiosity to find out what the heck is going on. And I recently, 2 months ago, was in Washington, D.C. for the Digital Chamber, which has always been a small group of people lobbying policies with the government, and it was packed. So we are seeing that transition of adoption, and I think it's because of that success. I think when we look at Bitcoin, is that in the difference between gold, because that's what I've been attacked for that too. How could it be gold and Bitcoin? Well, I think you should have both, because as a money manager in this diversified portfolio, you should have different asset classes, and you should have based on regressional math. Just statistically speaking, Ray Dalio, the biggest hedge fund in the world, he has 10% up to 25% will go in gold. Gold is a rudder, and gold has always been a significant preservation of wealth. So my vintage right now only has 2% invested in gold stocks, and they far outperformed in earnings this past quarter and stock price performance. They used to be at a 10% weighting; they're under 5%. So it's interesting to see that you would have far outperformed, because this century, gold has outperformed the S&P, or has been positive 84% of the time, and has outperformed the S&P by something like 25%. So having exposure to gold has only been wise and smart. Uh,
Yep.
and so when you look at Bitcoin, Bitcoin is preservation of wealth, but it's also growth. It's all about digital wealth growth. And that's what Michael Saylor is such a great spokesperson of educating people regarding the upside of Bitcoin. And what we're going to see, and for several things happen, you don't realize, but they're not just isolated, they build on each other. The fact that Trump could launch a meme coin the weekend before his inauguration and go from pennies to $75 and back down, and there lots of people lost money, but lots of people made money. The fact that could happen stimulates the idea, and it's just important for that idea of a meme coin actually comes from Bitcoin.
Yes.
It's all comes from the core belief of the significance of Bitcoin and the many attributes that Bitcoin has. Well, that was a token we're talking about. And what does the CEO of BlackRock talk about? Well, it's really hard as a CEO of a public fund group, etc., to recommend you buy this product, and so there's just you can't do it. You can talk about your investment process. He has had so much free publicity on Bitcoin and getting the first Bitcoin ETF. And if you know that a year before he was trash talking Bitcoin, that it was negative, until the SEC gave him the green light, and it became this political that the baton was passed to him, and he's been phenomenal, and he's gone through a massive wake up call, and now he's calling about tokenizing securities. Kraken 10 days ago says they're going to take 50 technology stocks, and you won't be able to trade in the US, and they're going to be significant, that you'll be able to trade 24/7. So what does that do to stock exchanges, that the crypto exchanges become more significant? What does that do for compliance, all these parts? It's evolving, like you said, so quickly, but it's all on the backbone and the success of Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin will continue to be the leader. Ethereum left proof of work. And what happened to the relative valuation to Bitcoin? It collapsed. It's not even stayed close. And I had one time $100 million worth of Ethereum. I sold it all to roll it all into expand Bitcoin and upgrade all of our machines and expand. So I think that there's something that's really profound about Bitcoin. It's a champion of so many things in the digital realm. And so on that journey last year, I don't know if you been to Plan B in Lugano?
No, I
Well,
haven't.
that blew me away, because that really, like, I went there and it was like going to Nvidia. I buy $100 million Nvidia. I'm a platinum buyer, so I get to go meet Jensen and go to their conference. And he runs a conference like Michael Dell does and Warren Buffett. They are so big that they have an arena of nothing but their companies or sponsors that you go to their booths with. And NVIDIA gets 25,000 people to attend their conference. It's like a rock concert. I'm looking, last time I was with Mick Jagger playing, it was like
Wow.
incredible to watch. But in his arena of all these booths are only people that are supporting the ecosystem of NVIDIA. So Michael Delza does the same thing, but half the size. And so now we turn around and we go to a Plan B. He has, what woke me up was that, and it relates to M-Pesa, what we talked at the beginning, is that outside of America, Americans are so critical of the government and the runaway debt and the rational reasons for Bitcoin, and they're right. But outside of America, you just don't realize they all love the American dollar. And it's actually kept countries and citizens stable. And countries like Argentina in 2002 confiscated all your US dollars. Only just this 3 months ago did they open it up for sort of trying to test liquidity for that people could have US dollars. We were talking almost a quarter of a century later. In Zimbabwe, 10 times they've confiscated your assets in your lockbox and your US dollars. So they now have in Zimbabwe a fortress, basically, where you have a lockbox to keep your gold and your coins, and it's only security, but not at the bank, because they don't trust the banking system. They have M-Pesa, or they turn around and want to trust cash. Well, Tether captured that with a stable coin. Tether has grown to $140 billion, and all they buy is US dollars. Well, I was shocked when I found out they have 320 million wallets. That's like $4,000 a wallet. And outside of that, I learned in Argentina from the American ambassador that the country's kept alive because there's 25 billion cash US dollar bills in mattresses and pillows. That's what makes their economy. Until Malay came in, it was hyper runaway inflation. Same thing in Zimbabwe. Same thing in Eastern European countries. So they want to have digital US dollars. And that concept allows Tether to grow to become the highest revenue per employee in the world. $175 million, only 175 of workers, but they keep the interest on that cash. So that makes them so profitable. In a money market fund that I have to pay you the interest in the treasury bills after the fee. Tether gets to keep it. And you say, well, that's just crazy. No one would do that. Americans don't realize outside of America, how bad the banking system has been and how corrupt it's been with governments to confiscate your financial assets. And so now we've seen Bitcoin grow all over the world, and Tether has become like the money fund, the stable $1, no volatility. But they buy US treasuries. They're bigger than Germany and own US government bonds. They're material. So it tells you that they have now purchased 100,000 Bitcoin. They're in Paraguay, where Hive is exploding in growth. They're in El Salvador. Their Tether is everywhere, and I was so impressed with the leadership of the company. And on everyone that spoke had some way of funneling money from all these emerging countries, digital wallets into Tether to be able to move money around the world. And so we are living in a digital realm. There are layers that are happening. Tether goes to show that, and Tether's not in America, it's not in Europe, it's not allowed to be, it's not in Canada, but it's grown to become the most profitable per employee company in the world. And they also own 50 tons of gold, which is kept in a mountain vault in Switzerland. And so it tells you that something else is scary, and people dismiss it that whatever happened in G7 countries. Well, Canada did it under Premier Prime Minister Trudeau with a trucker strike for freedom, because Trudeau passed a law during COVID to take away their freedom of protest. So he went and had the bank go in and confiscate money, lock down their bank accounts. And if you bought someone for a coffee and AI recognized you, they would lock down your bank account too. So
Yep.
even in
It's scary.
Canada, they would come in. Well, when is it going to happen in the UK? When is it going to happen in France? It's just a matter of time. And the idea and the concept Bitcoin protects you when you, especially take it offline, that you have this preservation of wealth. So in my journey, Bitcoin is about freedom, and it is about me protecting my digital wealth. And really, it all stems from my research on common law, that the idea that if you take away a law of freedom of money, you take away human rights. Every country that's taken away your rights to your capital is only a matter of time they take away your human rights, like Cuba, or in modern days is Venezuela in the past decade. And so it's recognizing that is making Bitcoin so much more important, that it's about freedom. And it's about Big Ben here, with Bitcoin in his eyes, because the fathers of America were all about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But it's my liberty and my private property is really important. I think what's really another part I've discovered in my journey of gold is under common law in those countries, you don't realize these little nuances, but in Texas, right across the Rio Grande, the river, they have gas too. But the property, the mineral rights are owned by the government, so they're never developed. In Texas, they're private property. You can buy surface rights and mineral rights. You just pay more per acre. In Canada, they're called patent claims, where you own the mineral rights. What you found in the oil and gas and energy space, where people own the mineral rights, there's been more technological breakthroughs. There's been more evolution taking place. And the idea of Bitcoin growing is all part of that connection between technology, property rights, human rights, are so, to me, so key, and they're intertwined. So Bitcoin is not just about I'm going to get rich to buy a new house or car. You find a lot of real hardcore Bitcoiners, that they don't drive the Lamborghinis. That's for the flashy trader. They just want to make sure that their wealth is growing and it's preserved, and they enjoy experiences of traveling the world and good education and good food. They're not the glitz that people think of. And then we have another group of what I call the gold bugs. They never buy any gold. They just want to bitch about governments. And
Yeah.
we have that with some of the Bitcoiners. I don't believe they own much Bitcoin. Uh, they
No.
just want to bitch about governments. And they can go and do that. But really, the audience is growing for baby boomers who still control 70% of the wealth. And the adoption of the baby boomers of owning Bitcoin is only going to grow. What we've seen.
Do you know? Sorry to interrupt you there, Frank, but one thing I certainly think about is the wealth transfer. Talking about the baby boomers, like you say, that the vast majority of value sits with people who are of an older age, and naturally, as time progresses, time can be your best friend or your worst enemy. There's going to be a trickling down of that wealth into a world that was born with Bitcoin in it and born with the cryptocurrency space in it. And I think that makes for a very exciting prospect in regards to the trajectory of Bitcoin and the adoption of it and the kind of flow of capital into it as a kind of native demographic takes hold of a lot of that value. It makes a very exciting opportunity for Bitcoin. I think there's many elements to Bitcoin. There's many different properties that it has. One thing I'm really interested to find out, I know you're a big fan of gold, is you mentioned people's skepticism on governments, certainly around debt. And this is a big question. Where do you think we are in regards to taking the US and their kind of financial system right now? We see some very interesting things going on with the debt markets. We see gold doing extremely well. And I think this is all linked. We see Bitcoin growing in popularity. Me and you spoke a little bit off camera about silver. And it mentioned that I'd started purchasing silver miners, and I think silver's going to do very well. I think this is all linked. Do you see an issue with our financial system? I think we all do. But do you see it being at a breaking point and Bitcoin kind of being here at an amazing time? I don't think there's ever been a better time to be interested in something like
No,
this.
I understand where you're coming from, but there's other nuances you really have to dig into. One of the things attacking that's beneficial for gold has been the attack by China by amplifying the BRICS power.
Yeah.
And it's really to attack the US dollar and to force trade. I think Xi Jinping's been a genius at creating a one road, one belt, but it's really one belt of communism. But out of
Yes.
195 countries in the world, he has lent $2 trillion, 2 trillion to 100 over 125 countries. He dominates Latin America. When Trump was sword rattling and boom, boom, boom in Middle East, drumming up $2 trillion of spending in America, the Chinese had invited every leader in Latin America and the Caribbean for a free holiday to Beijing and gave a checkbook for $9 billion of lifeline if anyone needs some money. It's very different. And so China's attack has accelerated. One of the things behind that was they wanted to have 6 years ago Saudi Arabia to take the yuan for their oil, and China and Saudi Arabia are going back and forth. And Saudi Arabia said, "You don't have fungibility. Your currency is not known in the world. It's not in your own country. You can't come with an American credit card and use it in China. Everything is actually gone digital there and controlled by the government. And so you have to buy gold." So you've seen China now evolve as the biggest gold producer and country in the world, and some of the biggest market cap gold producer in the world, the number one 24 karat gold jewelry company in the world. You're seeing this sort of transition take place, and they continue to buy gold to give in the global arena confidence behind their currency. And so some other central banks have taken that signal and they've started buying gold as a defense as China as continues the assault. So far, what you've seen is Saudi sells oil, they take yuan now, but it immediately converted to dollars. Who's really been impacted the most is euro. The euro has come off slightly versus what the dollars actually increased. So that assault has not been as strong or as fast as they wanted, but it's there. And so it's a geopolitical event that's driving the gold market. But China has been a dumper and anti-Bitcoin. which is really interesting in that dynamic because America is now embracing Bitcoin and wants to be a leader in the world in Bitcoin mining and technology innovation around the blockchain. They really want to push that. So I think that the buy of Bitcoin is different than the buy of gold. Um, but I believe that you should have both of them. So I have a Andy Warhol, one of his original prints, and I have a Brainwash, and I have another one, Picasso, because they're all three different pieces. I love the art. They're all totally different, but they're decentralized price mechanisms of people what they love. Each year, one becomes more flavorful than the other, but over time, they're all rising. So that's been my sort of simple metaphor that if you're not going to be a collector of art like this, that you got to have gold and Bitcoin. But I really think that if you want to have a growth profile, and I'm a young guy like you, for my age, they tell me I'm crazy that I would have it, but I believe I'm going to live to 100 with AI on healthcare and what it's doing. So I have a complete different faith and hope what's going to take place. So I'm long Bitcoin. And what I've seen in this past 3 months is the evolution of BTCI, a Bitcoin income ETF. And it's really, we were trying to do this with our own Bitcoin at Hive, is where and because some of the crypto mining companies put it on an exchange, they do a cover writing program over 20 days to get more income because Bitcoin's so volatile. So MicroStrategy comes out with a single, they don't do it themselves, but someone says, well, it's so volatile, we're going to first do it with Tesla, and that was successful. Now we're going to do it with Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy, which is now Strategy. And all they do is a 20-day roll selling call, because the new Viagra of capital markets is volatility. So you sell the vol. Well, this is what's become brilliant. The same thing with Bitcoin. So this BTCI has a 16% coupon that pays monthly. Why would I take risk in owning some government, say corporate bond that's going to pay me, junk bond ETF paying me 6 or 8%, when I know Bitcoin and I know about cover writing programs? I'd rather own Bitcoin and do cover writing against that's volatility than I would turn around to buy a corporate bond ETF, and I get twice the yield. And so the same thing when you look at MicroStrategy, the yield's huge because they're playing that vol. Over time, it will come down as the adoption grows on, but we're seeing this by the month. I mean, this is a big part. It's not waiting 5 years like I've had to wait from the creation of Hive for finally getting ETFs being created. But what Hive has done uniquely is that we're big shareholders of DeFi. And DeFi has now gone on NASDAQ, and DeFi was the first really sort of a Bitcoin product that listed on NASDAQ Swedish exchange that Europeans were able to go buy. And it's been on a tear, and we've done really well with it. And we've tried to invest in companies that are Bitcoin centric. So we invested in Matador because they were going to use the Bitcoin network to do ordinals and create AI gold art, and behind each piece of art was a gram of gold. So we helped, I guess, strategize with them in that path because all it does is create new products along the global network. And I really believe the Bitcoin network is going to evolve even after the next halving to become another methodology of sending art or some form of a contract that's very valuable that you want to have digitized and in a sort of a smart contract format that it will use this network. So I stay so positive about the industry. It's and for Hive, we're so excited that our frustration was we couldn't scale after Putin invaded Ukraine because everyone put a moratorium on green energy, basically. And when our growth profiles started to slow down while other people were able to grow and use non green energy. So now with Paraguay, meeting with the president, going there. They have surplus electricity. We're scaling. We have the biggest scaling program of all the crypto mining companies this year. And I believe that we're going to go through this re-rating because we now just hit 10 exahash and you become more institutional coverage. And then by September, we should be at 20 exahash. And by
Wow.
November, we should be at 25 and plan then to go double there. But that's plans for the future. But right now, we have funded the position to go from less than 1% of the network with the difficulty rising and halving taking place. We're now over 1%. We'll be at 3% by the fall. And that's very
Wow.
exciting because we have still only 25 key people running the business and making decisions. So the hash rate driven revaluation surge is underway. That's so exciting for the team. It's an undervalued growth catalyst when you go through 10 exahash. And I think we're going to get this multiple expansion. When we look at Hut 8, they traded $200 million for the same exahash of Bitcoin production.
Yep.
We're at 30 million. So, hello, it's a great opportunity. And if you compare it to what Marathon and CleanSpark are at, they're at over $100 million per exahash. So I think that this is for the same Bitcoin. And we did this unique transaction where we didn't have to borrow money to pledge our Bitcoin to buy all these new machines to take us back up, and we'll take it back in all of our Bitcoin. So on paper right now, it's still we've got all the upside of our hodl position to come back on this time next year. So I believe that Bitcoin's going to $250,000. Stay tuned to this story. It's very exciting.
Wow. And I want to touch on that in regards to your Bitcoin sort of strategy. Obviously, we've spoken about your mining strategy and the expansion that you're undergoing. What's Hive's approach to actually holding Bitcoin and perhaps leveraging it? Because it's very interesting. We saw this shift with miners, with companies more broadly. Michael Saylor, what a genius. Like or dislike the guy, nobody can argue in regards to his success. I mean, it truly is amazing. You see the likes of Meta Planet. I think you're going to see a wave of corporations actually look to do the same thing, including governments. What's Hive's strategy around all of that? Your kind of hodl strategy. Maybe you could explain that because people are very interested in this. Certainly, if Bitcoin's going to $250,000.
Well, it's like going into what they call no-fly zone countries. We're not going to go Bitcoin into Russia. We're not going to go to Venezuela. We're not going to go into these other high-risk countries. And it's thinking that way now corporately. So Hive realized you don't qualify for certain indexes unless all your production's from America or you have your home office. So we've moved to Texas. Now that we have a government, which was a no-fly zone, to this is a safe jurisdiction. America is very different from a year ago in being a safe place, and many of the regulations are already being with executive order to change, and it's a safe zone. So we will look now in America, but coming back to the fact that it's a safe zone, and I know that for Grow, which is a public company, is I'm also the controlling shareholder that was the original Hive shareholder, besides myself. It's now been buying Bitcoin. It's now, I feel, for it put on its balance sheet a greater crypto exposure, and so I'm very thrilled about that. So I think what Michael Saylor has done and what he did last week, and he spoke to a group of CEOs about the significance of putting this on your balance sheet. He was wonderful. He's very special. He's a MIT aeronautical engineer. He's a very smart, extremely focused person. His whole idea of the tokenization, as I mentioned earlier, BlackRock wants to tokenize all public companies so that they all trade 24/7. They want to be the leader there. This is really important to see. Who were the first movers to try that, even though it's outside of America, is Kraken. And
Yeah.
there'll be some mistakes going through that whole process, but they will set the beta site. They do this with medicine. They do this with new technology. We want to go and make you a beta site. We want to go test to see what we have to do before we have to create guardrails around it, etc. It's exciting that stocks will all of a sudden be trading 24/7. They'll settle with no illegal shorting. Hive has been through the experience of being interlisted in Canada and the US, where there's illegal shorting, and it's easier to do through Germany, where we're listed, in Canada on failed deliveries. So we've found where they were suppressing the stock to try to get us to do a financing at a cheaper price. We've dodged all those types of bullets, but we know they exist. If they were on the blockchain, it really becomes impossible to do. So we're really happy and excited. But as a company, to go from this time 3 exahash to 25 is profound for the management team. So stay tuned. We're very excited about it. And you know what? The other part was I wanted to talk about Michael Saylor is our AI business. So we still are the most profitable AI business, which we've kept low key as we're building and building in downtown Stockholm and downtown Montreal, and very close to announcing in various countries sovereign data centers, which we want to have in Sweden and in Canada. And so we think this is going to become a very important buzzword because you're seeing the big telecoms start articulating it in their vocabulary. But Michael Saylor said that how he used AI, and this is great for your listeners. He went and said, pay the money for the maximum was $200 a month for Open Chat GPT. And on Saturday morning, he spent 3 hours and he got all the securities laws and all the accounting rules. And he wanted to create a new preferred that offered a coupon over up to 6 or 8%. And it had all these perpetual preferred that could do all these interesting components. And the lawyers and accountants would say, oh, you can't do that. You have to go to what's already proven. And he said, no, I want to go and do. So he went and he created it, gave it as a white paper, gave it to his lawyers, gave it as CEO Feng Li said, and they created a $1 billion product from AI. So AI is a bigger buzzword actually than Bitcoin is when you see the adoption, but it's very hard to play the way you can play Bitcoin. So if you really want to play AI, you really want to be long Bitcoin, and you have to appreciate that both need data centers. That's a real key that you have to appreciate. It's all about first energy, own the land for the data center. Banks will give you lending against the land. If you just co-locate, they won't give you the money for the expensive chips. And so Cambridge came out 3 months ago and they made their presentation in Washington, D.C. out of Cambridge University that to go from a Bitcoin mining data center to high performance computing, that it's a key stepping stone. But the differences are that high performance computing AI, you have to be up all the time. You can't balance the grid. And Hive was the first Bitcoin miner to balance the grid in Sweden. And then Riot does it on a grand scale in Texas. So we have found a way to take surplus energy, help a community. When all the toasters turn on and it's 30 below in Sweden, we can go from 30 megawatts to 3 in seconds. And then reboot up to all of a sudden create income and job creation in that community. So we're doing the same thing, but in Paraguay, we're really helping the government build out their transmission, their infrastructure, and we're giving them US dollars every month. Because when they sell electricity from their hydro dam to Argentina, they get no pay or slow pay. With us, with Bitcoin, they get paid every month. And it's really helpful for the government for fiscal management. And so you see all these attributes all from Bitcoin. But when you go to high performance computing on these data centers, Cambridge said it's 33 to 1. I know it's not 33 times more expensive for the way they characterize it, but it's at least 10 to 1. So if you're a Bitcoin mining data center, then you just can't really go to high performance computing for that because the telecom companies haven't invested enough in fiber optics. They cannot handle an H100 NVIDIA chips data crunching. So it's stranded again, like stranded electricity. You can have this sort of stranded data analysis. And so we've seen this in Canada, New Brunswick. They have to rebuild the fiber optics. In Sweden, they built it. So the fiber optics and the telecom companies and the switching gear they have is able to handle H200 NVIDIA chips. In many emerging countries, it's not so. And in many rural areas in America, it's not so. So there's going to be a big build out to also process this. So, but when you have the stable energy and you want to go and fast track to go to HPC, you can do it in a year. And if you have greenfield for HPC, 3 to 5 years. So there's now this push to go after Bitcoin miners, not that have this stable energy, not to expand in Bitcoin mining, but to expand in HPC. So this will be this interesting transition. That's not what Hive is doing. Hive is running parallel, and Hive will do something special with Buzz, it's called, our HPC umbrella. But we don't believe that you cancel one because we believe that where you have in Bitcoin mining, you get your money back and then you can think of converting into high performance computing. But here's the spend. For every megawatt of Bitcoin mining, it's $1 million. That's back of the envelope. For high performance computing is 10 million.
Okay.
Before you bought the chips.
This is the beautiful thing about Hive. This is one thing and this is why we were so excited to have you on. Many people don't realize the duality with Hive technologies and the fact that there's been a kind of, like you say, you're doing both. And I think you're onto a winner on both things that you're essentially doing and looking into. And the way that you're doing it is truly remarkable. Certainly we've got the Bitcoin story and the distributed ledger story more broadly. And then we've got what essentially is going to enable the future. Hive's there on both points, which I think is exciting to say the least.
Well, it really is, and when Hive started, it was a lot of my gold followers jumped in because they were afraid to buy Bitcoin on the exchanges and have a wallet. It was just too complex for them. So so Hive became the proxy for crypto for them. So that's a big part of the raving success. For the big funding, Fidelity gave us $100 million over 3 tranches.
Wow.
And so then the institutional money came in. So what you have to realize in capital markets, you need price discovery, you need retail people. When we go look at Robinhood, Robinhood's average account's like 5,000. Schwab is 150,000. But it was Robinhood, and 20% of their profits come from crypto, was because they ignited the price discovery. And the price discovery brings in the institutions. It's a really important stepping stone. I also found an Apple stock in my analysis, because I'm a fund manager. I love this analysis and looking back and connecting the dots. Is that at one time, the biggest shareholders of Apple were retail investors through brokers like Merrill Lynch, more than any of the institutions. The institutions only really started getting into Apple is when Carl Icahn went after to try to force them to start paying dividends because they had such high free cash flow. And you got into this sort of wrestling, and it became, the institutions became aware of us and how liquid it was. But the greatest concentration of shareholders of Apple when it first surged, when Steve Jobs was alive, to $1 trillion was retail.
Wow.
And then it became institutional and retail. Robinhood's now $50 billion market cap, is bigger than most of the Canadian banks, and they've gone into Canada. They're going to shake up the control that the banks have had. They're going to really help the ecosystem evolve quickly from young investors that are speculating in the crypto ecosystem. And that speculation will see more retirement dollars, go into these other products that are being created. So I think this adoption will go, and then it goes to these pivot points that it goes exponential, and then it goes along sideways, and then is exponential. The crypto ecosystem on Twitter and Reddit is just is straight up. It's all straight. It's not going to happen overnight. It will have these moments, these epiphany moments, and you want to say, I was there early and I caught it. And so that's to me that's the excitement that where will I be next to catch it, and what will be the next investment to catch it. So I believe that Hive is positioned for that. We have lots of electrical engineers on our team, and we have, when you look at countries like Paraguay, their president is in his late 40s. He went to the University of Columbia in New York City. He worked for the World Bank. He's a guy's guy. He's a rugby player. Last night, their team beat Uruguay, and they're only a shave away from hitting the World Cup. So everyone
Wow.
and of all the employees in Paraguay this morning were so excited about the win. And so you have a young leader that is launched and is also supporting of the first digital bank in the country. And Hive has been able to open a bank account. Whereas before we couldn't open a bank account because the local banks told us it was the money center banks in New York that said they would shut them down if they opened up any account with anyone that was crypto related. But now it's evolving. We just went through this epiphany moment. We have a bank account and we're sending millions of dollars. How did we fund it originally? Stable coins. We could send $3 million stable coins. And so I think that you're going to see something is going to happen, that we'll get this epiphany. It'll be a breakthrough. It'll take it up to the next level, and the adoption process will continue. But if you believe in freedom and you believe in the humanitarian individual human rights, you must have some type of digital wealth. And it must be in a wallet that's outside of the greedy hands of bad government decisions. And it doesn't matter where you are, there's good government and good politicians, and there's always some nasty players out there that are greedy for power, and they will overreach, and you have to have protection for that. And I really believe that in America, and it's really kind of about freedom, and this adoption process will only accelerate from what's happening in America.
Frank, I think that's an absolutely beautiful thing to wrap things up on. I wholeheartedly agree in regards to where this industry is and where it's going. And I think, it's going to be very exciting to see Hive's journey. It's been very exciting to watch it thus far, to hear from yourself how this all came about and to watch it moving forward, certainly as it's ready to ride that wave. And I think this industry offers one of the biggest opportunities, or probably, if not the biggest opportunity that there is at the moment, coupled with things like what you're doing with the duality in regards to AI data centers more broadly. People need to understand the world that we're moving towards, and with that is a major opportunity. Frank, we're going to leave links to Hive Technologies in the description, where people can find you, of course, all the social medias, and yourself. It has been a true pleasure. Do you want to leave our listeners with one
If
thing?
you want to come to me, then it's usfunds.com. It's really simple. usfunds.com, and sign up for Frank Talk. It's about my experiences of traveling around and meeting CEOs and other leaders of the world, and capital markets creativity that I see. And then I would just go to Hive Digital. We have a robust YouTube presence, and we're on Twitter. But go out there, and I'll tell you what, for your listeners, if you send an email to Nathan at Hive, you'll get some swag. So if you want a hat, we have it for you, and you send it in, and we'll make sure all your listeners get a chance to get some of this swag. Feels free. Write to us, and we'll send you off some swag.
We're going to leave links to that. Thank you very much, Frank. We're going to leave links to all of that in the description. Frank, it has truly been a pleasure to pick your brains. Thank you very much.